The nuclear age saw huge advances in technology from the Industrial Revolution, but now we shall ascend further to the space age, thereby unlocking new and better technologies. My goal is to journey to the moon and obtain lunar sapphires, which will allow us to create new machines, tools, and weapons. In addition to that, I will also be attempting to create a molten salt reactor heat exchanger setup to produce huge amounts of steam to drastically increase my power output through the use of a steam turbine. Will I be able to survive the dangers of the space age and the ever-increasing radiation levels? That's what we'll find out in this video. Just so you're aware, this video takes place on the same world where I spent 300 days in the nuclear age, meaning that the world's day counter will show days 300 to 400. If you guys enjoyed this video and want me to survive another 100 days, then be sure to hit the like button. 30,000 likes and I'll do a part 2. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing. I'm trying to get to 200,000 subscribers by August and I need your help. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and join my Discord server, as you can find a Space Age content mod pack there. Hope you enjoyed the video. There's a lot of messy stuff left over around my bunker from the previous 100-day video that we did on this world, where we had to make the fission bomb and go through a billion different gases and fluids that were all in tanks and just a big mess everywhere. So I spent a lot of day one just clearing that up and trying to organize my area. My electrolyzers were still going very slowly. And I also grabbed some obsidian because I wanted to make an ender chest, which I was able to do on day 2, just a normal ender chest to store my plutonium-239 fission bomb, because I figured it'd be one of the safest places I could put it, where there's no risk of it getting lost or blown up or anything like that. I also looked at what I needed to make a Californium RTG, and it requires me to continue my production of the Californium we were making in the last video, so just working on the fuel lines for that. We've also been on this world for ages, and I don't have a multi-block kitchen yet, and I really need that. And part of having a kitchen, I mean, it's not essential, but come on, we gotta have the kitchen tiles. Like, we're not gonna make the multi-block kitchen and not make the kitchen tiles, which I decided to use quartz blocks and coal blocks for instead of concrete, just because it'd be easier than having to go kill squid. But I did kill some cyber demons instead. So I made a few stacks of that for the floor, and I worked on another room opening across from where my storage room, bedroom, house room is, I guess. And I made it pretty decently sized because some of it's decorative, but we also want a lot of functional room. I also used the same building palette again with the ironwood logs and the olive wood planks because it looks super nice. There's also something I want to do that's going to require some conduits, some Ender IO conduits, which require redstone and glowstone, among other things. So I discovered that there's a way that I can use some energy collectors from Project E. These are some of the only things I can make right now without a Philosopher's Stone, which is endgame stuff. Basically what this does, it will collect EMC very slowly over time from the sun, and then it will transmute coal and into glowstone and stuff like that. But I was also back to burning TBU fuel in my reactors again. I figured I may as well oxidize it with some of my spare oxygen to make it just a little bit more efficient at burning. Day 11, I made a bunch of conduit binders, which are the main component in various conduits from Ender IO. I not only need item conduits, which I can only make a few of because it takes ender pearls, but I need them for their special properties, with like filtering stuff and priorities and things like that. I also need energy conduits because the leadstone flux ducts are not cutting it, and I'd much prefer conduits from Ender.io, so that's what we're going to be using. I mainly just needed the item conduits to help me do some fancy automation for my apiaries, because it has to deal with like recycling queen bees and like various outputs and stuff like that. So I was able to eventually set up a fully automated system that would slowly just produce honey and wax over time all by itself with no input from me. I'd been having some power problems down in my various machine rooms, so I decided to make some more plutonium RTGs and install them, only to discover that the reason I'd been having power problems was because I'd cut the line and forgotten to replace it. But I figured I may as well still replace the flux ducts with enhanced energy conduits, which are significantly better. They're like the mid-tier energy transport from Ender.io, so we won't have to replace them with anything better for quite a long time. It's also that time again to break out the deco bench and spam a ton of cool looking props all over our builds. And this time we're decorating our kitchen to actually be kind of like a cafe with like a bunch of tables and food stands and stuff like that. Just a bunch of really cool features. It's one of my favorite decorative mods. If you saw my like Boston architecture video that I uploaded recently, then you'll have seen like I used a bunch of stuff from that mod there as well. It's just all around really good. It has so many different props, including a shrimp crate. Shrimp's actually like probably one of my favorite foods, to be honest. I also, speaking of food, started looking at how to make a top tier food, which requires a whole lot of stuff, which we can at least try to start working on. But like I mentioned in the intro to this video, our main goal after going to the moon is going to be constructing a molten salt reactor steam turbine setup, and that's going to take a huge amount of room, not just because the machines themselves are large, but also because, well, the automation needed to supply those machines with all the fluids and fuels they need also is going to take up a lot of room. In other words, we need another machine room, this time like 3 times bigger than the other 2 combined, maybe even more than that. It's pretty big. Throughout all this building, I have to keep up the production of multiple different types of nuclear fuel, all of which eventually result in a bunch of californium, which is useful for many things. But I also made panzer glass, and the next day I made a bunch of different like brick things, which I found from this cool mod, and I'm gonna use them in the pathway from my like reactor rooms to my new machine room. I'm probably not going to get around to decorating the machine room in this video because of how much stuff we actually have to build inside of it, but I can at the very least make a pathway to it, which is what I did on day 31, using like steel for support beam like things, and like the panzer glass, which is not only extremely transparent, but also technically blast resistant to creepers like obsidian. I don't really have to worry about that, but it's a neat feature. On day 32, I had to go looking for some materials for the floor because while we might not be able to do the walls or the ceiling, I kind of need to do the floor before I just start throwing machines and automation down. I did kind of decided on like this cool pattern using slate from cork and quarried stone from railcraft, and I'd eventually add a third block to that, which ended up being sheet metal from immersive engineering. But the predominant block that I need would be quarried stone, so I would need a whole lot of that, and I need much less of the other two blocks as they're more trim. I spent multiple days just building the floor, and I started with a pathway down the very middle, just with an alternating pattern of polished slate and the sheet metal, which looked really nice. The rest of the floor would just end up being quarried stone bricks and just some normal quarried stone as kind of a trim pattern. On day 36, I completed all the stuff involving the slate and the lead sheet metal, and I'd also depleted 3 pieces of curium nuclear fuel, which, when I grabbed all at once, gave me 1 rad per tick, which is about as high as it can go. It's one of the highest radiation levels I can get with the radiation shielding that I have, and luckily I only had to hold it for a very brief time, but it increased my radiation a very significant amount during that time. Little did I know, though, at the time that that was only a fraction of the radiation problems that I'd have to deal with in the coming days. More quarried stone later, and I'd fully finished filling in one side of the machine room. I also added a piano stool to my cafe because there's a piano, and it felt like we needed a piano stool, so that was something that I added. Day 39, I had like a ton of excess beetroot seeds and stuff, which I turned into plant oil, because you can also use plant oil in the automatic lubricator for things like the crusher. It's just not as efficient as actual lubricant that you get from oil processing, but it's what I can make more of easily. And it will speed it up about like 25% or 10% or something. On day 40, I started making a huge amount of wiring materials, like different connectors and relays and wires for all 3 different types of voltages. And I also made several transformers and just pretty much almost everything that goes with that, because we're going to need to start setting up the power grid in our new machine room, because we're going to have a lot of machines. We're going to have several different power tiers, I guess, for the machines depending on how much power they consume. And it's going to require a lot of materials. I started by taking a high voltage power line from my reactor room and running it out onto the floor of my machine room, but our power is going to be kind of stretched to the limit until we can get that molten salt reactor up and running, but that won't be for a while yet. My first goal for automation in my new machine room was to automate 3 different rock types, those being andesite, diorite, and granite, because I need some stuff that you get from all 3 of those when you run them through rock crushers. They each like give different various crushed minerals and compounds, stuff like that. So I basically have to automate diorite multiple times, because diorite's the base for like andesite and granite, and then diorite itself. So we have we're gonna need a lot of quartz, because you can use quartz to make diorite. So I worked on making some auto crafters, because I don't actually have access to like just single block auto crafter blocks. I have to make the multi-block. But the cool thing about the multi-block is that it does multiple auto crafts just in one thing, so that part's nice. On day 43, I set up the conveyor belts to transport my nether quartz from my auto sieves to the auto crafters to be turned into the various stone types. And later that day, I was able to make some diamond meshes and start sieving my compressed soul sand and technically the compressed heavy auto sieve things. And we started getting a bunch of quartz going to our auto crafters, but the thing is, it also gives me gas tiers, which is cool, but they're not used in that auto crafting, so I had to filter them out. I also depleted the last piece of curium nuclear fuel that I would need to make my 1 piece of californium nuclear fuel to obtain californium 250 for an RTG. I was very done having to search the entire world for stupid brown mushrooms, so I was able to get a ton of them in the nether, which was nice. And I made some more radaway when I got back to my base. I'd made enough before to get rid of the almost lethal dose of radiation, but I was able to go back to something very reasonable. On day 45, that piece of California nuclear fuel had depleted, and it was still 1 rad per tick of radiation, but I was able to get it out of my inventory super quickly. I probably should make heavy radiation shielding. The great thing, though, is that I was able to get Californium 250, which is what I need for a Californium RTG, and that is needed in a component of a spaceship. But the cool thing is I was also able to automate all the different stone types as well. So I made some storage drawers, and I gave them some like massive upgrades so they can store a huge amount of andesite, diorite, and granite in them. And I just started stocking it up so that by the time I actually had the rock crushers and all that set up, I'd have a huge amount of the stone. On day 46, I made a crystal chest upgrade just for fun. It doesn't actually increase the chest size, but it means that you can see the items inside the chest, or at least some of them, and it just looks really cool. The rest of that day, though, I just spent in the nether just grinding soul sand. I ended up with 1,300 compressed soul sand. Each one of those is 9 regular soul sands, so we had a lot. I'd be set on nether cores for a long time. Also, the cobble generators that I was using to put cobblestone into the recipes for my various rock things were too fast, so I tried making stack limiters to limit the output, and it kind of worked, but not really. It still produced a way too much cobblestone. But on the bright side, on day 48, I was able to make my Californium RTG, which in of itself produces 400 RF per tick just with no upkeep, but we need it for the nose cone of a tier 1 rocket, which is what we're trying to make. That day I made the circuit fabricator so I can get various wafers, which are used in a lot of different galactic craft things. I also made the compressor, which is used in making plates. I'd modified some of the recipes for the heavy duty plates, which are used in the rockets, to involve titanium, because titanium is often used in rockets in real life, and I thought it kind of made sense. Day 50 was just spent making a ton of plates, because we mostly just needed the tier 1 plates for like the hull of the rocket ship and some various things in like the fins and the booster. And after just a while of waiting around, I was able to get a significant number of plates, and also the NASA workbench, which is where I actually make my rocket ship. By day 51, I placed down my NASA workbench, and I'd gotten all the components for the rocket, and I was almost ready to make it, which is what I did on day 52. So we've got our T1 rocket, but we don't have a launch pad, rocket fuel, or a spacesuit. So those are all things that we still have to do before I can actually go to space. So I made the refinery, which is not the thing from Earth of Engineering, it's just the same name. But it basically takes just oil and turns it into rocket fuel very slowly. So while I was waiting for that to make rocket fuel, I dug out a launch room in my bunker for my rocket. I thought it'd be really cool if we launched it from like underground and we could watch it go out of the bunker, so that was my idea. The next several days were spent in just making various pieces of oxygen and space equipment, like a parachute. It's not actually oxygen equipment, but like a oxygen mask, oxygen tanks, which I have to fill with oxygen, and also like a oxygen concentrator backpack thingy. But that's not all I have to make. Because we have the Extra Planets mod, or one of the Galacticraft add-ons, we have to make a full spacesuit, which is, in of itself, quite complicated. It took a lot of oxygen compressors and various like radiation shielding things from space, and I slowly was able to get it done, but after several days of just crafting stuff, I was able to have my oxygen tanks filled up and a full tier 1 spacesuit. Yeah, so I'd forgotten I needed an advanced way for the first time I went to space to make a space station. So I had to go back and try again this time. But luckily, I hadn't forgotten anything when I went to make the space station this time. Although we did fly through a cloud of pollution on the way out. Basically, when you create a space station around the overworld, it just has like this little prefab structure that you can build off of, and it just gives you enough stuff to like place down a launch pad and basically get home again. Like it gives you your rocket and everything and a little bit of leftover fuel. I didn't really feel the need to linger there, so I just set up a little refueling area and decided to go back to the moon because I needed more sapphire ore. Because fortune doesn't really seem to work on that. I discovered that a little bit later here in a sec, you'll see. So I would need a significant amount of that. But the cool thing is that I have the ability to make machines from like thermal expansion and dynamics and all those various mods because I needed the lunar sapphires to make the machine frames. I can also make better weapons and a few other like individual items that I specifically changed the recipes for. I did a bunch of enchanting on day 64, which required me to grind a bunch at my my zombie farm, but I did at least get like a few decent things, even though I didn't really get Fortune 3. I got Fortune 2, which I tried to use, as you can see here, on the lunar sapphires, but it didn't do anything. What I am going to do, though, now right away is make the scar, because well, I can make the hardened receiver, which is what I need for the scar, and it takes 1 lunar sapphire. It's definitely a lot better than the rifle that I have right now. It's not silenced, but it does still have a scope, and it's way more powerful and way more epic. I spent about a day and a half like crafting it because it's a little bit complicated, but on day 66, I was able to make the scar, and we could test it out. The great thing is that it 2 shots most normal enemies as well. I also, later that day, I made a rock crusher so that I could start my automation of the various stone, like, minerals and things that come from it. So I started with granite, and I just hooked up the output to a rock crusher, and I need one of the 3 specific little, like, I guess, byproducts of crushing it, because you get sulfur and like 2 other things, and I only need 1 out of the 3 byproducts of it. So the other 2 went into a storage drawer, and the 3rd byproduct I sent into a manufactory, which turned it into sodium fluoride, which then has to go into a fluid enricher where it is enriched with water and turned into a solution of the sodium fluoride. Turns it into a sodium fluoride solution, literally. And that sodium fluoride solution goes into a chemical reactor and is turned into hydrofluoric acid and a byproduct, which is another thing that I need. The hydrofluoric acid is put into an electrolyzer and turned into hydrogen gas and fluorine. Now, I don't need the hydrogen, so I ended up just deleting the hydrogen. But I need the fluorine for several different things, including the molten salt reactor fuel. I set up the same automating process for one of the minerals from the diorite, which basically has almost the same effect. I think it's like potassium instead of sodium. And it also produces hydrofluoric acid, which is then turned into fluorine, which I made a giant silo tank for so I could store large amounts of it. I spent day 73 making a bunch of machines for another set of automation, which is this time for the andesite. Because the andesite, one of the things it gives me is beryllium, and I need molten beryllium fluoride for one of the things that goes into the production of fuel for the molten salt reactor. And the fluoride part comes from the fluorine. That's one of the uses for the fluorine that we have. On day 75, I made one of the other items that needs lunar sapphires, which is a seismic reader. And what this does is it basically gives me a map of the ore distribution in the chunks surrounding me, basically, so I can put like an iron ore into it, and it'll show me the distribution of whatever like type of ore or mineral I put into it, which is super useful. I don't have to go around scanning every single chunk. Late that evening, I also worked on setting up an automation thing for lithium, which comes from crushed diorite, so that means more nether quartz expenditure. I also heard a bunch of explosions in the distance and realized that the tubes carrying my molten beryllium from the melter had exploded because they weren't hardened. I would have to replace them with hardened fluid ducts instead of just normal fluid ducts. But that aside, I had to set up like a fancy automation thing for my lithium, because the lithium comes out in like ore pieces which have to be turned into the ore, and then I can melt it down, and then I turn the molten lithium into lithium fluoride with my fluorine, and then I take the fluoride, like the molten beryllium fluoride, and I take the molten lithium fluoride, and I stick it in a salt mixer and get molten Sbeev salt solution, which is actually a real thing, and it's used in my molten salt reactor fuel. And on day 80, I made all the machines I would need for the automation of the nuclear fuel for the molten salt reactor, because it takes like molten LEU-235 fluoride Sbeev salt solution fuel. It's a long thing. Basically, it's molten LEU-235 fuel that has fluorine added to it and then has Sbeev salt solution added to it. The cool thing is that when you deplete it, you can separate the fluorine and the Sbeev salt solution from it and reuse those two like compound material things, so that you don't have to continuously produce that. You just have to make more of the base LEU-235 fuel, which is super easy. It's just uranium-238 and uranium-235 just melted down and combined in a salt mixer. Now that you kind of know some information about the fuel for the molten salt reactor, let me explain the other fluid that I have to make, which I'm actually making here on the screen right now, although this is actually the uranium automation. But what I was making before is trying to get a bunch of molten sodium and potassium, which I have to turn into eutectic NaC alloy, which is basically the fluid that gets heated up in the molten salt reactor and then transfers its heat to water in a heat exchanger to produce high pressure steam, and then you take that high pressure steam and run it through a second heat exchanger, and it heats up normal water into also high pressure steam while cooling down the original high pressure steam into normal steam, which is what we're after. So I not only need the fuel for the molten salt reactor, but I also need the eutectic NaC alloy. Luckily, the potassium and the sodium both come from byproducts of my Sbeev salt solution or mixture automation. So I just have to do a couple steps with melters and like crystallizers and stuff to get it, but it's not too bad. It doesn't require separate automation. I do need around 20 buckets of it or so to start off with. On day 83, I'd started to get some molten LEU-235 fuel from my uranium automation setup, which is good, but we're going to need more of that than what we have now, that's for sure. It doesn't burn a lot of fuel, but it burns enough that we have to constantly automate it. I then started separating the potassium out of one of my byproducts, and I combined it with the molten sodium to obtain eutectic NaC alloy. But there's yet another thing that I need a big like fluid automation, or at least just like work process to make, which is calcium sulfate. I think it's what it is. It's needed in crystal binders for elite plates, which are elite, very elite. They're very hard to craft. And I have to go through a bunch of different steps with sulfur and other things, which I'll explain in a sec. But on day 85, I've spent a bunch of time making as many of the components for my heat exchangers and my one molten salt reactor as I could without the elite plates. I pretty much made every single thing that I could that didn't involve the elite plates, because I hadn't started yet on the production of that stuff. I mainly had like the more technical components left. I had made the vents, the frames, and the walls alright for the various machines, but I still needed some like coolant heaters and heat exchanger pipes and stuff like that, things that required the actual elite plates. And the process to get like the calcium sulfate stuff requires me to go through 3 different iterations of sulfur, from like molten sulfur to sulfur dioxide to sulfur trioxide, and then I think to like sulfuric acid, so maybe like 4. They all either take water or oxygen, and it's kind of a big pain, but at least we're getting a lot of eutectic NaC alloy, which is good. Oh yeah, and did I mention I need 96 buckets of the sulfur stuff? Yeah, I need 96, which equates to a stack and a half of the calcium sulfate, which is exactly as much as I need for every single elite plate. Eventually, I started getting sulfuric acid, which is the last sulfur thing that I need. I just have to combine that with like a different solution to get calcium sulfate solution, then crystallize that or something. I think that's the machine it was. And then we get calcium sulfate, which is what I was able to start getting on day 91. I also had to make this like fancy crystal thing called like boron arsenide or something, which was just boron and arsenic, and I already had arsenic from one of the like the rock crusher things. I just had it in a big storage drawer, so that wasn't too bad. Just had to melt down some stuff and then combine it. But I still had to actually make the fancy fuel for the molten salt reactor. I had the LEU-235 fuel, so I got my fluorine started making it into like the fluorine fuel. And then I moved my Sbeev salt mixture over and started combining that with the fluoride fuel to make the final actual fuel that we need. On day 92, I made a bunch of crystal binders using the calcium sulfate that I had, and I could make elite platings from that point on, meaning I had everything I need to make the final bits of the molten salt reactor and the 2 heat exchangers. But just because I had the materials doesn't mean that I actually was able to make it quickly. No, it still took a lot of time just crafting everything. I had to make several different alloys, like hard carbon alloy, and there was like extreme alloy and a few other things, which took like diamonds and various other things. Then there was an alloy using the boron arsenide, which is why I needed that. It's like thermal conducting alloy or something for the super fancy thermoconducting alloy heat exchanger tubes, which are the most efficient. And on day 94, I made everything that I would need for my steam turbine from immersive technology, which is what will be generating our power from the steam produced by the nuclear fission. I also started making eutectic redstone NAC alloy mixture in the preparation for the starting up of our machines, because at this point we have everything that we need and we're not far away from starting up. Blocks like the molten salt fission vessels and coolant heaters need to be set up in a super specific way to make sure that they push all their like various fluids that go in and out of them in the correct way. And I would nearly set it up correctly except for one little mistake that I discovered later and fix. It wasn't a critical error, but it did mean that I lost a little bit of eutectic NAC alloy until I discovered it and was able to send it back through the system. When I first turned on the molten salt reactor, everything worked correctly, and it started sending hot eutectic NAC redstone alloy into the heat exchanger, which when turned on started cooling down that alloy and producing high pressure steam from the water used as a coolant. The eutectic NAC redstone alloy would then be sent back to the molten salt reactor to be heated up again. there we have it, 100 days survived in the space age. Like I said in the beginning of the video, 30,000 likes and I'll spend another 100 days where I focus on upgrading my bunker with new and better machines and eventually even going to Mars. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and be sure to let me know down in the comments if you want to see more like this in the future. That's going to be all for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I've been Sbeev and I'll see you in the next video or live stream. Bye!